and the governor of the great state of New York, Andrew Cuomo.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Governor Cuomo, I would like to thank you for joining us today for the presentation of the 2013-2014 executive budget. When the governor first asked me to join him as lieutenant governor and lead my position as mayor of the city of Rochester, people said, "Don't do it. It doesn't work. Albany can't work. It's not possible." And those are some of the nice things that they said back then. Well, I think it's fair to say the governor and we have proved them wrong over the last 2 years. In the last 2 years in New York have been transformational. And many say that those 2 years began with the passage of the first budget. It was the first time in years that the legislature and the governor came together to pass an on-time budget. It closed a $10 billion budget gap with no new taxes and no new borrowing. That budget set the tone for the years to follow. Since then, New York has become a national model for efficient, effective government that delivers for the people that serves. And I have no doubt that we will see the same teamwork and collegiality in next year's budget process as well, as this year's budget process. Let's pass 3 on-time budgets in a row, and let's do it together. We will make history. The state has not had 3 consecutive on-time budgets since 1977. Since day one, the governor has repeatedly stressed that the budget is about fiscal discipline and better performance, getting government to do more with less and cut the waste, as many families and businesses have been forced to do across New York State. This year, the governor set forth a bold and robust agenda for our state. But as he said in his State of the State address, it starts with passing a fiscally responsible, on-time budget. New York State has come a long way in the last 2 years. You can see New Yorkers have a renewed sense of confidence in their government. I'm proud to have served with Governor Cuomo over the last 2 years. He has been a great leader. He has been a great New Yorker. He has been an outstanding governor. He has brought a renewed sense of pride and investor confidence in our state. And I can tell you, he brings his A game to work every single day. And it is now my pleasure to introduce someone who has dedicated his life to public service. He's been at the helm of the Budget Division for the last 4 years. Please welcome Budget Director Bob Megna.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Duffy. The Lieutenant Governor is absolutely right. New York is in a very different place than we were 2 years ago. But I can add to that because I can honestly say that New York is worlds away from where we were 10 years ago. After 25 years in state government, 5 in the legislature, 15 in the division of the budget, and 4 years as budget director, I have seen it all. I have taken part in 20 budgets. You know, saying that out loud makes me want to cry. This used to be a process marred by partisan gridlock and dysfunction. Year after year after year, the state would try to balance the budget by putting the burden on taxpayers, borrowing what they could not pay back, and attempting to deceive New Yorkers with hidden agendas. And as we know all too well, it did not work. The major difference between then and now is that we have taken politics out of the budget process and put professionalism back into the budget process. The budget should be an accounting document, not a political one. And that is what the people in this room have done during the past 2 years. They have put politics aside and come together to pass a fiscally responsible blueprint for New York. The reforms enacted by Governor Cuomo and the legislature over the past 2 years have moved our state past the era of perpetual budget crisis and bolstered confidence in state government. Under Governor Cuomo's leadership, enactment of the state budget has been orderly and on time. On time is particularly important to me right now. I'd like to note I have a special plea for getting an on-time budget this year, in fact, an early budget this year. Since I'm going to become a father again for the first time in 27 years, and the due date's in March, we need to get done. So let me get back to a more serious note. After a period of severe instability, the state's finances are finally on solid footing, and the proof is in the pudding. Standard & Poor's upgraded New York's outlook from stable to positive, citing our restraint on increases in school aid and Medicaid funding, as well as the new Tier 6 pension plan for public employees. There is no doubt that there will be obstacles in the future. But as we have proven before, New York will rise to the challenge as it has for the past 2 years. As we all know, and I know in particular, Governor Cuomo does not like to rest on his laurels. But the difference between this year and the 2 years ago is that now, under Governor Cuomo's leadership, we have established credibility, we have balanced the budget, we have passed 2 consecutive on-time budgets, and we have restored the public's trust in New York State government. I would like to thank my team at the Division of the Budget for all the work they've put in on this budget, but I would also like to thank all of the governor's senior staff who contributed enormously to this budget. And finally, and most importantly, it is my great honor and privilege to introduce the Governor of New York State, Andrew Cuomo.
Well done. Thank you very much. Mr. Robert Megna, 20 years in the Budget Division. I remember that when it started. It was an alternative to incarceration program at the time. And 20 years in budget, and then a child every 27 years. Megna is the definition of stamina, I want you to know. Bob Megna, give him a round of applause. He's also one heck of a budget director, by the way, on the side. But he and his whole team have done an extraordinary job, and we want to thank them very much. I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor, Bob Duffy, who's just, you couldn't ask for a better partner or a better public servant, Bob Duffy. We're joined by the Controller of the State of New York, Tom DiNapoli. Pleasure to be with you, Mr. Controller. Majority Leader Dean Skerlos. Pleasure to be with you, Senator. Majority Leader Jeff Klein, pleasure to be with you. Democratic Conference Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, pleasure, Senator. Speaker Sheldon Silver is not with us here today. This is a day of a family day and a day of births and expectant births, but the Speaker's daughter, Michelle, who goes by the nickname of Rookie, has had a boy after 5 girls. The Speaker is literally at the bris today, so as we would say in Italian, mazel tov to the Speaker. And Bob, if you need a Moyle recommendation, I know where you can get one. Chairman Denny Farrell, thank you, who's here today. Minority Leader Brian Kolb, good to be with you, Assemblyman. And a personal thank you to, again, the entire Budget Division, but also Secretary Larry Schwartz and Counsel Mylan Dennerstein for a great job on the budget. Thank you very much. 2013-14 budget. Just to recap, 2 years ago, we said that this government needed fundamental change, that we needed to rebuild the government, literally from the ground up. And it was about restoring public trust, getting people to believe in the government once again, earning that trust, and renewing the purpose and the function of government, and to make the government work once again after many years of dysfunction. The state government is about two primary driving forces. This is a state of fiscal responsibility and a state of social progress. And those are the two main drivers for government. Economic development, it's about jobs, fiscal responsibility. Best thing we can do as a state government is to get that economy running, get families, get individuals jobs. Best thing we can do for local government, get the economy running, get businesses paying taxes, let them run their local governments. At the same time, this is a state of social progress. How do we make the state a better state? How do we move forward? Those are the two main functions. And the instrumentality of change, the driver, is government, and the operation of government to get that economy running and to get that social progress done. We started 2 years ago, building on the economic development platform, building on the economic development task, and we started by taking on tax reality. What was tax reality? Tax reality was recognizing that the current trajectory of state taxation had to stop, that there was no future for New York State as the tax capital of the nation, that you were just chasing businesses from the state and chasing people from the state. And the answer couldn't be every year to close a hole in the budget, that the government was going to put its hand back in the pocket of the taxpayer. The taxpayer's pocket is not a bottomless piggy bank. Tax reality. We followed that with a property tax cap that gave relief to homeowners all across this state that was sorely needed. Then, last year, the lowest tax rate in 60 years for the middle class. Just so everyone knew, this was a different New York than we were talking about. Tier 6, to bring structural reform and truly change the tax dynamic of the state. The second line of approach on economic development was to change and restore our relationship to the business community and create public-private sector partnerships that actually worked. That's our concept of entrepreneurial government. Entrepreneurial government is not an oxymoron. You can have a government that thinks as an entrepreneur. You can have a government that works in partnership with business and is productive and is lean and is mean. That's the New York Open for Business campaign. It's a new New York. It's a different New York. It's a New York Open for Business. You think you knew New York? Come take a second look, because it's a different New York than you thought. And the regional economic development councils that really bring this all together on the ground, region by region. And that is the epitome, that's the laboratory of the government-private sector relationship. Innovation hotspots, which we proposed this year, are the cherry on the cake for the RDCs. These are high-tech incubators, partners with higher education facilities, tax-free zones, startup companies, venture capital investments, and the support services to nurture those businesses. Also this year, I spoke about in the State of the State, taking it to yet another level with a business marketing plan where we will help market New York businesses and New York product. This state produces an amazing array of products and services, and we want to help market them, especially across upstate New York. Social progress, the state is about opportunity. The way we provide opportunity is the public education system. That's the essence of this country's promise. It's to be whatever you want to be. The ladder to get there is the public education system, and we have to have the finest in the nation. Fairness leads to my minimum wage proposal this year, making sure people are earning a fair wage for a fair day's work. Concept of community and fostering community, that's public safety. Equality for all, we are all the same. It's not just a goal and aspiration, it's also the law in the state of New York. And let's make it a reality. And the concept of community and helping people rebuild. We have people all across the state who have been hurt. And it is our obligation as a community to work with them to rebuild. What drives all this is government. Government operations, making government work. The concept that we've been pushing for the past 2 years that government is not a static concept. Government is not a debating society. Government is an active service bureau. Government is supposed to perform. It is supposed to do something. It is a functional organization. The way the government function intersects with the economy is the government functionality by passing 2 balanced budgets that controlled expenses, that were honest documents, and that got done on time. Congratulations to the people in this room for making that happen, because it fundamentally changed our relationship with the business community, and it fundamentally signaled a different day to people all across this state. Paying for performance and results from every one of our programs, from every one of our agencies. This is not just about funding a budget. It's about producing results for people. And this is a different mentality than the old mentality that said every year put more money in the budget, more money on the budget, more money in the budget. More money in the budget will mean more results. No. More money in the budget just meant more money in the budget. More money in the budget just meant you were hurting the economic development and fiscal responsibility because you weren't producing better results for people. We've had one of the most expensive education systems in the country. Not one of the highest performing. And every year the answer was, well, put more money in the budget and maybe we'll get more results. Nobody lives that way. Nobody in their private life. Nobody hires a vendor, has them come to the house to fix something. It doesn't work. They call up the vendor and they say, come back again tomorrow. I'll pay you more and maybe you'll get it right. No. Pay for results, pay for performance. And put the customer first. This is not about funding bureaucracies. This is about providing services for people. Last year we spoke about the education system. That the education system is not about funding a bureaucracy or funding groups or funding trade associations. Education is about getting the best education we can for a student. It's about the student. Healthcare system is about the patient. The tax system is about the citizen. And remember who we really represent in all of this. That's what we've been doing for 2 years. And 2 years later, it is safe to say that the government is working better than it has worked in a long, long time. I wouldn't say it's a Swiss watch, but it is working better than ever before. The budget was historically the flashpoint for dysfunction. That became the metaphor, the delays, the gridlock. It all became about the budget. And people all across the state would talk about the late budgets as a symbol of the dysfunction and the disarray of Albany. The exact opposite has now happened over the past 2 years. People are now seizing on the budgets and the successful budgets as a symbol of a government that is now functioning once again. S&P raising the outlook on the state. Good government groups, budget groups, noting the success. That takes us to today. And the executive budget is simple and it is straightforward. It is not supposed to be traumatic. You know, if the government is working and the government is working well, the budget is supposed to be simple. If you take the politics out of the budget process, and the budget was professional, it should be a relatively simple exercise. It's not the way it was in the past, but it's what it was in the recent past, and it was last year and is this year. So, the 2013-14 budget gap is $13 billion. I'm sorry, they had the decimal point in the wrong place. It's $1.3 billion. I wanted to see if you were paying attention. Dean, you can start breathing again now, Dean. $1.3 billion. When you look at the financial plan, had we not done what we did over the past 2 years, literally the budget gaps would have been $13 billion and more. It would have been this year a $17 billion gap had we not made the reforms that we made, and the reforms going forward, you can see 20, next year 22, the year after that. Just to give you an idea of how this gap compares, we started 2 years ago, the gap was $10 billion, which was 12% of the estimated receipts. Last year, $3.5 billion, which was 4.2%. This year, the gap is 1.3, which is roughly 1.6% of the estimated receipts. So how do we close a $1.3 billion deficit? First, what we don't do is as equally important. How do you close the gap? First, reduction in state operations. This is non-personal service, consolidating state back office functions, just managing the government and finding savings in the management of the government. The scheduled increase was 1.4%. We would propose state operation funding is flat, which would save about $400 million. Local aid at a proposed increase of 3%. We would increase it 2.3%, which is still more than the rate of inflation, saves $500 million. Better way to do debt management. We've been working with some private financial sector companies who have some ideas for us on how to better manage the debt. We could bring that cost down from 5.2 to 1.1. That would save $128 million. We have workers' comp reform that will also have a positive effect on the state insurance fund and will allow us to release reserves of $250 million. Tax and Finance believes they have some enforcement mechanisms that can make them more efficient and more effective, and that's another $35 million. That is the $1.3 billion deficit. That includes, that counts in it, the $543 million in this year's spending that I laid out in the State of the State last week. The State of the State initiatives, just to run through them again, from general funding are the increases to education. The full day, pre-K, longer day in year, high-performing teachers, community schools. The upstate tourism, Taste of New York, and innovation hotspots, which is the economic development program that goes with the regional economic development councils. That is $89 million. Capital spending, we propose another round of New York SUNY 2020 and expanding it to New York CUNY 2020, the city system, for $110 million. We laid out an affordable housing program, which is $1 billion over 5 years. That funding comes from Sunny Mae and HFA restructuring. We're transferring the Mitchell-Lama portfolio that is now in ESDC to Sunny Mae HFA and refinancing that portfolio and adding capital funding. The cost of that is $194 in the first year. New York State Innovation Capital Fund goes with the innovation hotspots. That's funded by ESDC. New York Green Bank Solar Jobs, Charge New York, $100 million. That is from NYSERDA. Total of $543 million. The truly significant spending in this budget, that this budget anticipates, is the proposed funding from Hurricane Sandy, that we are proposing $3.6 billion in spending over the next year from the federal aid of Hurricane Sandy. Our partners in government, an asset this year and an asset last year was the Chief Judge, the Attorney General, and the Controller have managed their operations very well, and they have come in at flat funding. Flat funding is actually very hard to achieve, and it takes a well-managed office. And obviously, all those increased costs year to year, you're finding a way to save. So this is a job well done. It also puts the state in a much better financial situation. And I'd like to applaud the Chief Judge, the Controller, and the Attorney General for their help on this. Summary, what the overall spending will be. State operating funds will be at 1.6%, which is obviously below the 2% goal that we have set. All funds without Hurricane Sandy and without the Affordable Health Care Act. Affordable Health Care Act, quote-unquote Obamacare, has increased the amount of money, Medicaid money, that goes to the state. But all funds is still under 2%. All funds with the Affordable Health Care, the additional Medicaid money, goes to 2.6. All funds with, hopefully, Hurricane Sandy goes to 5.2%. And again, that's the bulk of that is the federal Sandy funding. Education and Medicaid are 50% of the state budget, as you know. In 2011, we basically changed the way we fund Medicaid and education. They had built-in 13% annual increases, which were unsustainable. The law replaced them with reality-based growth indices in education and Medicaid. The budget continues as a fiscally responsible course. Education, the current law links the annual education spending index to the rate of growth of personal income. That's the index that we set last year. If you apply the education index to this year, it's a 3% increase in education, applying that index. That's $611 million. We propose, on top of the 3%, a pension and fiscal stabilization adjustment, which adds up to an additional point as a recognition of the pressure of pensions and the current economy. That would be an additional $203 million. I also laid out in the State of the State a number of initiatives moving towards full-day pre-K, expanding the school year, community schools, and incentivizing performance for master teachers. When you add that all together, it's 611 is the scheduled 3%, 200 for the additional 1%, 75 million. That would be 889 million. That would be a total of 4.4%. Last year's funding was a 4% increase, which means we'd be increasing, obviously, by 0.4, which is $300 per student average increase over last year's increase. That would be a significant increase to education, and I am happy to propose it. In relative scale, when people talk about education funding, which is one of the great topics of discussion, how much, what the funding for education is, this is an instructive chart. Over 2 years, we will have increased aid to education by 8.6%. That is double the rate of inflation. That is 4 or 5 times the increase in home values during the same period of time, and it's during a period of time where student enrollment has gone down. So, ideally, we would always like to fund everything with all the money in the world. But we live in the real. And I think these increases and investments in an education that we have made are notable and significant. And if we link them with real performance systems, so we're actually getting something for our funding, it will be even better. The teacher evaluation system is working. It's a success. Only a handful have not put it in. If you remember, the teacher evaluation system we started talking about in 2010, we got nowhere, literally, in 2010. We got nowhere in 2011. We got nowhere in 2012. We then said, if a school district doesn't agree on a teacher evaluation system with the local union, they won't get the 4% increase from last year. Lo and behold, we had 99% compliance. Out of 691 districts, 685 districts actually put in a plan. Only 6 districts did not complete a teacher evaluation system, and I think that's a great success. I think the model's working, and I think we should continue it. Let's continue to keep the increase in the aid linked to a teacher evaluation system being submitted. Medicaid funding, like education, Medicaid set an index for growth. It was the 10-year average of healthcare CPI. Last year's Medicaid index was 4%. This year's Medicaid index is about 3.9%. I propose staying with the index. 2 years ago, we established an MRT. It has had dramatic results for the state of New York. It stayed under the Medicaid index for 2 years and planned savings of $17 billion over the next 5 years. When it comes to economic development, the regional economic development councils have been doing great work all across the state. We had the second round actually in this room. We want to extend the program to round 3, same level of funding, but these councils are up and running. There's a great energy, there's an optimism, they're learning as they go along, and I say we keep it running, again at the same amount, but they're developing real momentum. Innovation hotspots are what we discussed earlier. This would be $50 million for an innovation venture capital fund where the state could invest venture capital in startup companies, and $5 million for support services, lawyers, accountants, et cetera, to incubate those businesses. A $5 million performance grant for the community college system to change it to a job linkage system. Right now, they're training for jobs that don't exist. The new way is identify the job first, identify the employer, find out what you need to train to get that person in that job, and train for that job with those skills. It's a different orientation for the community college system. Some are doing it, most aren't. We want to incentivize that with an award system to get the high performers operating. Last year, we did the Buffalo $1 billion investment program for Western New York, $1 billion over 10 years. It was $100 million for the second installment, and that would be this year. Buffalo Bills are staying in New York. That's the good news. $60 million, the Bills better win this year, my friends. Talk about performance funding. Our Taste of New York program, $2 million for the implementation of Taste of New York. These are going to be duty-free shops, a network of duty-free shops hosting just New York products so people get oriented towards them. An upstate New York marketing campaign, $5 million as a competitive upstate regional tourism marketing campaign. And this is $110 million for another round of NY SUNY 2020 and NY New York CUNY 2020, $110 million of capital. That's Chancellor Zimfer signing that big smile because I'm signing a big check that says SUNY on the top of it, and that's why she's smiling. The film production tax credit has worked very well. It has a national reputation. It has been year to year, which has caused an instability in the industry. I want to be able to say to the industry, we're going to continue it. We're going to continue it for 5 years, so plan to bring your movies to New York. Historic Preservation Tax Credit. We vetoed it last year because it wasn't in the budget. I said I thought it was a good idea and it should be in the budget, and I proposed it in mine. It makes a difference in urban areas. It makes a significant difference in Buffalo, and I believe this should be funded. The resort casinos that we were talking about, I believe for upstate New York, they could be one of our best economic development weapons. Restoring the economy in upstate New York is something we've all worked on for many, many years. This is one of the most exciting opportunities that I think we have. We estimate that it would generate $150 million in revenues. My proposal, 90% of the revenue goes to education, 10% goes to local governments that are hosting the resort for local property tax cap relief. Increase the minimum wage because it's fair from $7.25 to $8.75. Total wages would increase by $1 billion per year. With more disposable income, workers will spend more and sales tax will increase. When it comes to government operations, first, the Environmental Protection Fund. As you know, we've held it harmless over the past 2 years during very, very difficult budget times, but we held it flat. We now propose a two-prong approach to grow the EPF. First, we propose adding $15 million, and second, propose strengthening the bottle bills enforcement, which we believe would generate an additional $4 to $8 million, which would also go to the EPF. Both actions this year will take the EPF from 134 to 153, a $19 million increase, but it deserves it. I started this business in housing more years ago than I care to remember. We still have a housing shortage and a housing problem, and that is in many ways the nature of the beast with housing. You need to constantly renew the supply because you have units that are coming offline. We proposed a $1 billion housing initiative, $100 million of which would be for Hurricane Sandy, $700 is for the preservation of Mitchell-Lama units, which are an old housing stock and need to be refit, and $230 for 5,400 additional units. This comes from an HFA mortgage refinancing, some additional capital, and housing funds, but it doesn't come off the annual budget. The state continues to have excess prison beds, and this is good news. Estimated 2,300 beds, 4% decline in prison population over the next 4 years. We propose to close 2 of the least efficient prison facilities. One is Bayview in Manhattan, which is now vacant. The cost to keep an inmate in Bayview is $74,000 per year, compared to $34,000, which is the average cost. Beacon and Dutchess, 53% vacancy, $69,000 per year. We're paying to keep an inmate there compared to $34,000. It's not right. We can't afford it. If we're serious about balancing the budget, then let's run government the way it has to be run, and we should close these 2 facilities. Juvenile justice, we started a program which is working, which is taking at-risk youth who are in juvenile justice facilities and bringing them back to their communities where they can get support closer to home. It's also less expensive. It's also not as damaging in some ways as institutional care. It also saves the state money. We want to continue that, closing 4 additional non-secure institutions, 88 beds, saving $1.4 million annually. Local governments. National economic downturn has put local governments under significant stress, just the way it's put the state government under fiscal stress. Last year, we began enacting mandate relief, and we've enacted significant mandate relief. The pension reform Tier 6 bill made a big difference, the Medicaid relief, and early intervention. This year, we want to continue to give Medicaid assistance. Last year, we started by taking over the growth of Medicaid, capping the growth. This year, we'll assume another $111 million to reduce the cap to 2. It will phase down to 0 by fiscal year 16. One of the most common complaints from municipalities is the process of binding arbitration. Binding arbitration will expire on July 1st, 2013. The current statute directs arbitrators to consider a government's quote-unquote ability to pay. And ability to pay is the controversial concept. And many government officials will say this actually never happens. The ability to pay is not put into effect. We want to change the law to say if a government is under fiscal distress, and we'll have a formula to define fiscal distress for a municipality, but if a government is under fiscal distress, ability to pay is limited to a 2% increase for that contract all in, and the 2% will then link up with their property tax cap at 2%. Local governments and school districts continue to struggle with pension costs. The number increase here is staggering, and it's frightening. 1,000% increase over a decade. We passed Tier 6. Tier 6 will make a significant difference. Tier 6 has the bulk of the savings in the out years. That's when the reductions are felt. Local governments have a short-term problem in that they have pressure today before they can get to the out years, which is where Tier 6 starts to make a difference. We're proposing a Tier 6 savings financing plan where you're basically financing against the savings in the out years and taking some of the savings in the out years and pulling them forward. So the rates would actually be a little bit higher in the out years when Tier 6 kicks in, but lower now when local governments are truly feeling fiscal stress. To give you a sense of what the rates would do, TRS goes from 11.8 down to 16.5. The reduction in rates, 4% for TRS, 8.9 ERS, 10% for police and fire. This makes a big difference for local governments. Syracuse, it would be $12 million savings, 4% of the budget. Rochester, 21, 5.6. Buffalo, 19, 5%. This is a significant way to alleviate the financial stress on local governments. It's also smart. We did Tier 6. It builds on the success of Tier 6, and it basically provides a financing plan to get the municipalities through this pension bubble, which is what we're really experiencing. We're proposing a financial restructuring assistance task force. And what this is this. It would be a task force made up of the Comptroller, the Attorney General, Division of Budget, and an outside private sector consultant. Many of these localities are under financial stress. And again, their situation, for those of us who have gone through the state budget, their situation basically mirrors the state. High pension cost, low receipts, they have a deficit, they have difficult contracts to manage. And they have stresses. I've spoken to a large number of local governments to try to talk them through this and understand their problems. There is no one problem among the localities. They're all different. They all have different issues. In the private sector, if you had a corporation in this situation, they would declare bankruptcy, and they would go to bankruptcy court, and the bankruptcy court would restructure the. We don't really have a mechanism to restructure finances of a locality. This financial restructuring assistance task force is going to perform that function. A local government, a city, a county can come in, Comptroller's office, Attorney General's office. What is the situation? What is the problem? And how do we help that locality specifically? Is it a debt problem? Is it a legal issue? Is it a contracting issue? What is it? And friends, that every municipality in the state that has a financial problem, they're going to come to Albany and ask for a check. We don't have the money. And it doesn't solve the problem anyway. Because if there is a fundamental economic inequity in that corporation, that public corporation, resolve the inequity. Don't subsidize it year after year after year after year. It's only going to get worse. And there is no piggy bank here in Albany to subsidize it in the first place. Let's find out what it is. If it's a debt issue, if it's a contract, or if the numbers just don't add up, and then we have a mechanism. It's called the Financial Control Board. Control boards are really our example of a municipality in bankruptcy. But this would have all the tools in one task force. And let's come up with a real resolution rather than going year to year, hand to mouth, and papering over the issue. It's not helping anyone, and we don't have the money. This was a crisis. What we did over the past 2 years was not easy. And again, I applaud you for your performance. And it was a crisis that was averted. And hopefully this year, we continue the same functionality that we established over the past 2 years, and we do a budget, and it's an honest budget, and we do it on time, and we do it together, and we continue our record of effective leadership for the people of the state. But now we have another project. This is going to be years. The house, and the house is damaged. Schumer and to Congressman Peter King and Congressman Grimm, who worked very hard, getting passed in the House of Representatives, which was very difficult. But the packages saying we want individual communities Why? Because every community's need is a little different. And every community has a context and it has a fabric of its own. And we can't sit here in Albany and tell Oceanside what they need to do. And we can't sit here and tell the Rockaways exactly what they need to do. We'll do the big mainstays. Know what to do about their recreation center. And frankly, the process of them coming together and healing themselves is a very important exercise to go through in and of itself, where we can say to the communities, we have funding available, you come. Consultants, types like McKinsey and PwC. Rockefeller Foundation will be advisors to the task force. One of the things we're going to ask for the legislature to expand the design-build legislation. This was one of the great successes of last year. Design-build allowed us to do the Tappan Zee Bridge as fast as we have done it thus far. Hopefully the future moves as well as the past year has. But design build allowed us to reduce the cost of the bridge by about $1 billion, believe it. $1 billion. We want to expand that design build capacity to all state agencies and authorities. Every state project has a twofold mandate: bring it back, but bring it back better than before, and do the smart work that we need to do to make sure this doesn't happen again. So build it back, but build it back better. 2,000 miles of highways we'll rebuild, like the Ocean Parkway, Nassau County. We're going to spend about $2 billion in replacement of roads where they shouldn't be, or mitigation of roads that are prone to flood. Transit system took a terrible beating, and we also learned a lot. $6 billion in mitigation, vent covers, tunnel bladders, pumping capacity. You can't let the subway system flood. You can't let the subway system fill with water. People talk about Manhattan, and the brilliance of Manhattan is how high it builds. The real engineering marvel of Manhattan is how deep it built. It goes high. It also goes in some places 15 stories down. No one ever anticipated water on the top of Manhattan filling 15 stories underneath. You can't allow the water to enter that underground infrastructure. It's an engineering challenge, but we think we'll make progress. Coastal mitigation, Fire Island Inlet repair, $34 million, but we have a very aggressive reconstruction program of mitigation of beaches, dunes, wetlands, reefs, what they call soft mitigation, $125 million to set up soft barriers. In housing, 2 points. One quick story. I visited a community in Suffolk at right at the heart of the storm, and about 3 blocks back from the water, we started to walk through the community towards the water. 3 blocks back, houses destroyed on both sides of the street. House after house after house. We eventually get to the water's edge, and there's one house on the water's edge, which should have been theoretically the house that was most damaged because it was the first house right on the bay. No damage to the house whatsoever. And the house is on stilts, piers. It's the only house on piers. And the owner came out. I said, and no damage at all. I said, well, your house is on piers. Many of the other people, by the way, had rebuilt their home 2 times, 3 times, 4 times over the years. Grant unless I did a different mitigation standard, so I had to put the house on piers to get a federal grant that I had applied for. And that house, make the right design change, do the mitigation, and rebuild that house once rather than us rebuilding that house every 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Pay a little bit more, do it right, keep people safe, and save money in the long term. And that's what this Build It Back Better, Recreate New York Smart Home program is all about. There's also an option where some people can say, I've gone through this enough. I've been flooded. Many of these communities, people will tell you they've been flooded 3, 4, 5 times in the past 10 years. Many people will say, I've had enough. Buy out the site. Don't rebuild. Let them sell the house. We'll buy it. We'll keep the land vacant, and they move somewhere else. That would be an option that would be open to buyers also. It would also save us money in the long run. Healthcare, we learned a lot in healthcare. Damage to hospitals, not only the NYU Langone Hospital, but nursing homes all across the state. They weren't ready for it. We're going to have a construction mitigation program. We're also going to have a patient tracking system, because when you have to move patients, it becomes very dangerous, and it was very difficult for us. Fuel supply is another area where we are incredibly vulnerable. We are going to redesign a fuel backup system, establish state reserves, have gasoline stations, have generators in strategic locations. Water supply, same thing, fresh water supply and the sanitation system. We had significant breakdowns. We had significant discharges of water treatment facilities that were just broken and just automatically were discharging. So we'll invest in that. The energy system, those of you who live on Long Island, Westchester, know this very well. Some blackouts as long as 21 days. We want to invest $2 billion in hardening the energy system. That's all the top-down state-planned efforts. We'll also empower communities to create their own recovery programs. There'll be community reconstruction zones. They will be zip codes that were determined eligible by the percent of damage in that zip code. The CDBG program, Community Development Block Grant Program, HUD program that I ran for many years, is the funding source from the federal government. CDBG has appropriate uses, et cetera. It's one of the most flexible federal funding streams in existence. It can do housing, transportation, economic development, and that will be the funding stream we'll use for these community plans. Funding will be through a formula if the community comes in with a plan that's accessible. These will be the zip codes that are eligible for Hurricane Sandy reconstruction. Relatively straightforward, but this is really good news. The legislation, thanks to the good work of a lot of people in this room, doesn't just cover Hurricane Sandy. It also covers hurricane storms Irene and Lee. So we can also go back and help those communities that are still trying to work through Storm Irene and Lee, and there are many of them. Don't think because Don't think just because it was over a year ago that these communities are still not suffering. They are suffering, and this will give us an ability that we didn't have last year to go back and make a real difference. This is the map of the areas that will be eligible under Lee and Irene. And you can see many of the communities that were hard hit, the southern tier. This map actually happens to go right around Senator Tom Libbis's house, but that was just accidental. Hudson Valley, North Country. So we'll be able to do a lot of good for a lot of communities there. So to recap, my friends, the bad news is we have a lot of work to do. The good news is the past 2 years, we have shown an amazing ability to do what nobody said we could do. Listening to Lieutenant Governor Bob Duffy about what they said when we started, what they said about him, what they said about me, what they said about all of us, all the cynics, all the naysayers. No way we could do this. No way we could put the politics aside and come together and actually get things done. That the state was doomed. Government couldn't work. Well, we showed them wrong, and we showed them wrong in an incredibly profound way. 2 years. This legislature, this state went from one of the most dysfunctional in the state, which everybody loved to say, to a legislature and a state that now sets national precedents and national groundbreaking policy. So that is the good news. The better news is the $30 billion is a lot of money. And we'll keep our fingers crossed it's not done yet. But I believe we're going to get that funding. And the best news is that we are New Yorkers. And as New Yorkers, we are at our best when things are at their worst. And when the situation is darkest, that's when we shine the brightest. And there's something about these crises that have brought us together, upstaters helping downstaters, downstaters helping upstaters, people coming together, and it is inspiring. And that unity generates a force and a source of energy. And I believe we're going to take that energy and we're going to take this functionality and we're going to take this partnership and we're going to take this goodwill, and we're not just going to build back New York to what it was. We are going to build a New York that had never existed before. And I really think this state is going to rise from what has happened and rise from these crises And we're going to take this moment in time and moment in history, and we will pledge ourselves to build this state back to a level that it's never reached. Because at the end of the day, it's very simple. It's about leaving our children a state, a home that is safer and stronger and richer than the home that we had, and leaving them a better state of New York than the state of New York we inherited. I look forward to doing that together. God bless.
On behalf of Governor Cuomo, I just want to thank you all for taking time to come today. That concludes today's presentation. Thank you.
Always is. Got the corrections officer already hitting down? If you read the budget, you read the book, and you read the presentation, you'll see that there is a note that has every copy.
He just broke through. Yeah, I'm seeing how to.